Namaste and welcome to a new episode of the Bharat Varta podcast. I am Ashish Chandorkar, your host for the day. Today, I have a very accomplished guest duo to talk on a very interesting subject. We will cover the blockchain technology and its role in governance. And to talk about this topic, we have with us Professor Abhay Karandikar, who is the director of IIT Kanpur, and Krishna Vishwanath, who is an entrepreneur and investor. Thank you, Professor Karandikar and Krishna, for joining us. Okay, so before we start, let me just give a brief introduction of our guests today. Professor Karandikar is best known for his work in the telecommunications sector in India. While today we talk to him about e-governance and blockchain, we hope to get back to him soon to talk about 5G in India at some point, maybe for another day, of course. Professor Karandikar is an engineer who taught for several years at IIT Bombay. He has been associated with institutes like CDAC, Telecom Standards Development Society of India, and is also a part-time member of the TRI. He has been the director at IIT Kanpur since 2018. With IIT Kanpur hosting the National Blockchain Project, there's no better person than him to understand what India plans to use blockchain for in the e-governance space. So, Professor Karandikar, thank you for your taking time out for Bharat Varta.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think it is a pleasure to talk to you.
We also have with us Krishna Vishwanath, who is an entrepreneur and investor based out of Pune. He calls himself a student of blockchain, by which he means a PhD student at Symbiosis. Before he got enamored with blockchain, Krishna has worked extensively in the Indian capital markets. He was one of the first investment bankers in the country when ICICI got into that traditional merchant banking business. And he's also an alumnus of IIM Ahmedabad. Most importantly, Krishna is my and my co-founder Srivatsa Subanna's ex-boss and our friend, philosopher and guide to whom both of us owe a lot of life lessons. So thank you, Krishna, for joining us on Bharat Varta today.
Thank you for having me on this call. I really appreciate it.
Okay, so before we start, I'll mention a nice coincidence. So today's podcast is a Madhya Pradesh club of sorts. Professor Karandikar originally hails from Gwalior. Krishna was born in Bhopal, and most of our regular listeners know that I am from Indore. So sort of a mini reunion of three cities of Madhya Pradesh. So
Yes.
That's a nice one. Jai Ma Narmade.
Okay, so let's get into the subject of the day, which is blockchain and e-governance. So, Professor Karandikar, let me start with you and trying to understand what is the National Blockchain Project all about, and how did IIT Kanpur get involved in this process?
So the whole idea of the National Blockchain Project is to basically, develop the technology and do the research in general in the blockchain area with regards to its applications in various e-governance projects. The project has actually three parts. One was, of course, the feasibility study to find out, which are the e-governance project which can be addressed by the blockchain. The second part, of course, is to do the research and technology development for some of the identified projects. And third is, of course, the incubation activities where we can commercialize the prototypes that will get developed as a part of the project and incubate the companies as a startup, as a part of our startup innovation and incubation ecosystem. So that was really the project, and IIT Kanpur got involved because in IIT Kanpur we have a lot of expertise in the blockchain area and in general. We have experts like Professor Manindra Agarwal, who already but he's also has been working extensively in security, cryptography, and also the blockchain area. So that is how IIT Kanpur got involved. It is like a 5-year project started in 2018, and it will continue till 2023. As a part of this project, we have identified land record management to be one of a very big thrust area where we can explore the possibility of developing the technology for its application in the land records management.
Right. Great. I think that's good to know. Very interesting as well. And we'll probably cover, some of the other aspects also of the project. So, Professor Karandikar, as a follow-up question, what are the other e-governance projects? I mean, you talked about land records, but is there anything within blockchain and outside blockchain that IIT Kanpur is also working on the e-governance side?
Yeah, so outside blockchain, we recently worked with the Ministry of Defense. Ministry of Defense has this grievance portal where, there are a large number of employees. They have various grievances related to their services, maybe related to pension having some problems or gratuity having some problems. And most of these complaints were coming in the form of unstructured data. I mean, people were submitting documents or people were simply writing emails and all. And these lakhs of queries were coming, and the Ministry of Defense, we are simply not able to process that. So we had, a team at IIT Kanpur which worked with the Ministry of Defense. That has really first task was, of course, to convert the unstructured data into structured data, and then use some analytics tool to process the data and present in a form which can then be easily analyzed and then acted upon. So we developed the first prototype, and now the Ministry of Defense is really very got very interested. They are working on expanding the scope of the project for the next 3 years. And as a matter of fact, we believe that this kind of a portal may be not just applicable to the Ministry of Defense, but to other ministries as well, maybe to a larger, central government employees and so on. So this is actually one which is sort of outside of this national blockchain project. In the blockchain project also, apart from land record, there are other topics like house tax payment, in the municipal corporations that once does, or healthcare infrastructure records. So those are also the projects which are being studied upon as a part of the national blockchain project. There are other activities of the e-governance we have been involved. IIT Kanpur has been closely working with the state of Uttar Pradesh on various projects. In fact, during this COVID pandemic also, we closely work with the UP government for doing the audit of the oxygens. And for that, we really developed a portal that has not been a public, because that portal has been really used by the state government to really use their infrastructure to decide about the resource allocation. But a lot of learnings were there as a part of the portal, and I think we could help the state government to some extent in achieving the optimal allocation and utilizations to the extent that was possible. So I think these are some of the projects that we have been involved with.
Right. Actually, the UP Chief Minister Yogi Adityanath had an interview with Economic Times on May 31st with the journalist Vatsala Gaur, who covers politics. And he actually has mentioned about this portal held by IIT Kanpur. And I think he's also named IIM Lucknow on that interview. Yes. About how they have collaborated on the oxygen audit side.
Yeah.
So,
but I just wanted to mention here that in all these projects of e-governance, the key thing is the availability of data and the integrity of the data itself. So there is a lot of scope to work on and that has been applicable even in the land records or others. In other projects, for example, that Ministry of Defense grievance portal I talked about is, a lot of this data is not digitized sometimes, this is not in the structured form. So that itself, poses a challenge for the success of the e-governance project, whether it is a blockchain-based project or whether, it is a non-blockchain.
Right. Yeah. I think that's an interesting point. I think we'll talk about that in more detail with Krishna on the concept of blockchain itself. So, Krishna, I mean, blockchain has been part of the hype cycle for what, a decade or so now. How do you see this concept evolving?
Very interesting point you make. right? So it is actually, if you go down to what it is, it's a very philosophical question, right? It's really about decentralization, and where does decentralization fit into blockchain? Is a technology, is a set of protocol to implement trustless systems, right? So uh, most most human governance systems in the world are all centralized, right? From the initial times. I mean, earlier we had barter, then found money, but then we had a tribe or a king or a prime minister. We have the systems that humans have designed to organize themselves and to govern themselves are largely centralized systems, right? So the whole philosophy around the evolution of blockchain is, how do you create interactions, potential interaction between participants where trust is absent, and that is where the initial origin was. That's where it started with a digital cryptocurrency. This has been something. It's the agenda is driven by potentially right-wing libertarians who really felt that, do we need to have a centralized, trusted entity to organize a human activity? And I don't know. The answer is still not available. There are benefits of having a centralized entity who you can potentially trust. If there is a benefactor, if there is an avuncular, if there is an entity which can be trusted to do well for most people, that works. And I mean, from a cost perspective, having a centralized system is so much more efficient than having a decentralized system, which essentially is a way of saying that, what, I don't trust any single entity with the records, so let us all maintain records simultaneously, right? That we all agree that these are records that are accurate and are organized and ordered in the right way. It's a very expensive system. It really goes down seriously philosophically into, is this how humans can organize? The libertarians seem to feel that yes. I do not believe that in human history we have such a system that works so far, right? Even if it's democratic, it is essentially a bunch of people, electing a subset of people to perform functions on their behalf. So how is it? Where would it go? Would decentralization eventually work? These are all questions which are open at this point in time.
Right. So there's been a feeling, Krishna, that blockchain as a concept has become a hammer in search of the right nails. Do you see a genuine practical, application or a set of applications coming through in anytime in the near future?
Yep, we have been consultants in our previous life, right? So we all love to draw these diagrams and scare corporates with this large wave which is coming, which if they don't monitor will blindside them, right? So you're right to that extent. I mean, it's been high on the hype cycle for a long period of time, and there are enough naysayers and critics who say that there are all of those famous diagrams which say that you draw a complex flowchart and then ask the questions, do you need blockchain? And most of the answers potentially lead to a no, right? So as I said, it is an inefficient way to organize data, right? What I mean, so for layperson, what is a blockchain, right? Essentially, think about it. If there are 4 or 5 of us friends who stay in a chamari, right, and all of us incur expenses for food, or we bring vegetables, or there are common costs, how do you create a system such that all 5 of us can record expenses and arrive at some nature of netting at the end of a period, right? The easy dirty solution is people put a paper on a fridge, attach it to a magnet, and people are supposed to keep writing. Now the idea is that you assume a whole set of good practices. You assume trusted behavior from people. Blockchain is something similar, right? At this point in time, what happens is that all of us tend to trust our government, maintaining, say, my date of birth, my income tax records, my earnings data, my GST data, all of those health records. We trust them, right? We say that they will not misbehave with this, they will not use it badly. But over time, centralized systems have been found to have been challenging. There is this raging battle over social media right now, right? Essentially, what is it? It is a centralized entity, whether it be a Twitter or a Facebook or a Google or whoever, who are accumulating, essentially providing you a blackboard in the sky where all of us go and pen our thoughts down. These people have found a brilliant way to monetize that, right? So the information which is there is then used and at times potentially misused and abused for other purposes. So centralization, while it has all the advantages, there are disadvantages which are there. So is it a hype cycle? Potentially it is. I have seen, at least for the last 7 years, that this is POC. This is the world of POC. Everyone and his uncle is doing a POC. Every CXO worth his salt needs to go back and report that we are doing deep POC. That you don't want to be seen as a Luddite who's stayed behind on the wave. So there is a lot of jest and humor around this. There is a lot of derision around the term blockchain. I think blockchain, the term is enough to put a lot of practitioners off. And people say there is no use case, therefore it's a hammer searching for whatever it can find. You pick it up and hammer at it. I have a slightly different feeling. I feel that its best use case is already there, right? I think the best use case for blockchain is that phenomenal currency which has been made, right? You may say it's a currency, it's a commodity, or it's a tool, economic tool which is out there, monetary tool. Whichever way you see it, I think it's a phenomenal jump of imagination. It's an amazing invention from a human, a dog, a set of individuals, someone from the future. I don't know who Satoshi is, but to think about it, putting together so many elements of cryptography, of monetary systems, of distributed computing, of networking, and creating incentives such that a design of an accounting system, forget money or commodity, of an accounting system which people can push peer to peer, can be built and can exist for over 10 years with potentially $1.5–2 trillion worth of MCAP. It's a phenomenal honeypot for bad actors to go and try and attack. So I tend to think that we're trying to invert with that. It was created for a purpose. It wasn't a technology which generally went around and said, let me apply that, right? There was someone thought that having centralized money is a societal problem. And this bunch of someones have been trying to find a solution for 30–40 years. Now these people, someone out of that, or a bunch of someones out of that, or the CIA or whoever, one doesn't know, created a reasonably elegant solution. And it's a solution that works in practice. And we are still scratching our heads in theory. Why does it work? So is there a use case? I think that's a very powerful use case in there. Now we're trying to introduce that into the business world. We're trying to introduce that into governmental systems, into this one. But there is, as I said, philosophically underlying all this is the thinking that there is no central figure. Now, when you impose the condition that I want it to be permissioned, we are trying to latch on to a buzzword and corrupt it to your potential requirement.
Right. Interesting philosophical point there, Krishna. But let's try and understand what has happened in reality, right? So in the permissioned world, which is in the government world on land records, and maybe also digital healthcare infrastructure, which is another part of one of the POCs in the National Blockchain Project. So Professor Karandikar, if you can talk about what exactly has happened on the land records management and on the healthcare infrastructure using blockchain, that would be really enlightening.
No, if you look at the land records, then that has several parts and touches several departments, like revenue department, which maintains records of rights to the land. Then there are these survey and settlements which are maintaining these village maps or the maps of the cities and other things. Then the registration and stamp duty, where sale deeds and all are registered. So these data are available at different departments. And I think as was just mentioned that blockchain is actually a sort of a distributed system. So you basically create a distributed ledger which records all these list of transactions between multiple parties that is happening, and that list is maintained in a verifiable manner. So this was actually the objective of this land records thing. One part of the land records project was first to digitize the data itself, to make it available in a computer readable format, because that itself was the part of the project. And once that is done, then you put it in a distributed ledger, which actually, create a list of all transactions between these parties. And then as a part of the project, as a part of the prototype, IIT Kanpur team has also developed a land record management portal. So that was essentially the prototype. I think the prototype has been built, and I believe that it is now ready for deployment in a large scale that can be deployed and tested. As regards, I think the smart healthcare infrastructure that you talked, I think that is more like a feasibility or a lab scale prototypes, which we are first trying to have electronic health records with our own small health center that we have in the institute. But this has a much bigger project. I think the National Health Authority, I believe, is already working out this Ayushman Bharat project and the Digital Health Mission. And as a part of the Digital Health Mission, I believe that it has the technology per se, the blockchain technology per se, has an immense scope in maintaining the electronic health records of various citizens or the patients, which is available in a secure form, but at the same time, which can be accessed in a verifiable fashion by a doctor. And of course, it is not available to other parties or other people. So there is a immense scope of using that technology. Of course, we have not created any architecture for the digital health mission. We have not been involved with this. But I believe that there is a possibility of applying this technology in that area in a very big way.
Right. So, sir, one follow-on question on the land records project. So, how is the rollout expected to be? I mean, will it be central government led, or will each?
No. We are working with the UP government first. I think we are working closely with the UP government. Right. And once I think it is deployed, then probably it can be scaled to other states and other places as well. Yeah.
Right. And will this be like one system? I mean, can this be like one national system, or will it be like state-specific system? So, is that flexibility there?
See, land records is basically a state subject. It is usually maintained by the state government. So it has to be implemented, in different states. And there are certain attributes which differ from state to state also. There are state-specific things also. So yes, I mean, it has to be deployed by each state.
Right. Okay. Interesting, because that sounds like a blockchain of blockchain type situations, Krishna, right? Like each state might have its own organization, but like, for example, if there's a commercial investor trying to buy land or trying to understand where to buy land across 5 different states, 5 options, but then
that is possible. That can be made possible in the long run. Once all the states have come on board and have implemented, then that is not very difficult to do that technologically.
Right. Okay. So, Krishna, one question for you. So, have you seen some of these solutions being deployed in other countries, and have they been successful on the e-governance side?
So, it's POCs galore, right? So essentially, I think the progression has been physical records, some nature of automation. In democratic places, there was a resistance to automation. When we say automation, it was automation of whatever inefficient processes which were there were continued without thought, to the systems that you bring in. That then morphed into, by the time we were into the 80s and 90s, we got into internet So essentially, all of these are what? These are all government to citizen services or government to government requirements or government to business requirements, right? We call a bunch of all of those services as e-governance. So initially, when you needed to get the birth certificate, there was that physical counter where you went and you filled up some form. That guy, you transcribed that form into something, and got some associated documents attached that, and you got it out. Then suddenly people felt that rather than using a typewriter, a computer may help, right? So that same process was automated. Then a post-computerization, we had the internet boom. So people said, you know what, here is an opportunity. Maybe I can do the same transcription in a computer format, and therefore printouts are easier. Then later on, we got to a situation which said that there is this new shiny tool. Chalo, so let's put a blockchain wrapper around it. Now, I mean, as I said, philosophically, something which is centrally done. If registration can be done by a system, regardless of the government of the day, right, with no central authority, if there is a set of smart contracts which are designed such that anyone can announce a birth, and there is a set of protocol which can confirm that birth, then that system will generate the birth certificate, right? If that such a system exists, then it's a decentralized system, and you can potentially think of this as is independent of a central authority. In the absence of that, I think we are all, I mean, it's all fashionable to apply the technology, the buzzword of the day, into the current situation. So lots of times when you say, e-enabled or e-governance blockchain or an smart contract IoT or a machine learning something, it is an attempt to I mean, it's almost a jargon being attached. So what have we seen? We have seen, Estonia, since the 80s has been having e-registrations, right? So you could set up companies in Estonia, you and I can get citizenship in that country. All of this is online, right? But there is a central authority which is doing this. Now that central authority may choose to be a node, but it wants to be the controlling node. You and I cannot register some citizens of Estonia. So you can distribute the database in 20 places. You can attach some labels around it and say it is this. And that is largely what has happened, right? So in many places, we have seen e-governance experiments of this sort, where it is essentially, say, government to consumer services. I mean, quite honestly, it is best service in a centralized fashion, right? But you can have self-service where I apply, put all the details on my own, they have verification, and then I can take a printout and stuff. So those can be done, but I think a lot of people have gone down the path of seeing where can I apply some hashing functions here, where can I say that this is now a distributed database. So a lot of it, to my mind, is a misnomer, right? Lots of people have been doing smart cities are a very, very popular thing, right? Earlier, the smart city was fashionable. You should know what are the services that a city will offer its citizens. Then people said, I need to study traffic. Then people said, I can bring IoT on. IoT has this challenge about trust. Therefore, you say now that the moment the word trust came in, therefore people jump in and say, it's blockchain based IoT, which will give me, smart traffic. So what is happening is largely it's been POC. I'm not aware of any reasonably large size country where it is live and in production. One area where people have made somewhat more progress is in digital currency, right? So a lot of, while it's not e-governance per se, but lots of governments in the world, lots of central banks, lots of, I think, pushed by BIS, are making attempts to understand the beast that is called digital currency. And there are some who have actually already launched. I think Caribbean islands, some people have launched. China obviously is far ahead. Sweden is quite further, well along the road of trying to have an e-krona. Many of them, quite frankly, don't even want to use blockchain while doing this. But there are some very interesting experiments on the monetary side, which is closer in nature to the origin of the technology.
Right. Fair point. So, Professor Karandikar, let me ask you this. I mean, how do you see the adoption of some of these solutions, right, within the government circles? Right? Like Krishna kind of hinted that people always resist technology adoption or even automation for that matter, right? So what is the response that you see from the stakeholders who are sponsoring these projects?
No, I think, I mean, what Krishna has said, that's absolutely correct. So I think basically, the adoption will happen and accelerate if people see a value in it. Because see, at the end of the day, like, it doesn't really matter what is the underlying technology behind any applications. As an end user, I don't care, whether the technology underlying, let us say, land record systems or healthcare infrastructures or smart contracts. What is the underlying technology, whether it is blockchain or whether it is anything XYZ? If as an end user, if my job is getting simplified, if I am getting benefited by that, and my quality of experience is improved from the end user perspective, and from the government perspective, if the compliance is improved, the reachability is improved, and the government can provide more services to the citizens, and also can connect with the citizens, then I think obviously the adoption will improve. It doesn't really then matter whether the underlying technology is blockchain or not. Now, of course, in this project, what we are trying to see is that, if this underlying technology makes the job of end user, easier in terms of accessing those government services, and also from the government point of view to scale the services to a larger citizens. So if those jobs get accomplished, and if we are able to demonstrate successfully that, then obviously there will be adoption. If those jobs don't, those features don't get accomplished, then the technology will not get adopted. Okay, and then maybe some other technology will have to be used. So I think so it is not as such the adoption of the blockchain or other technologies. The job is really in the e-governance project is, all e-governance project is that how to improve the citizen services, how to make them accessible to the citizen from the citizen's point of view, and from the government's point of view, how to scale the services. And that is how the governments are really looking for. So that's what I would look at it. And I think what therefore Krishna has really said it is therefore we should not look at is that we have to use only blockchain. If some other technologies or we have to use only machine learning or AI, or keep applying machine learning at every other place where it is not needed, or keep applying blockchain at every other place. We have to really see that for various applications, how do we make that application citizen friendly, which citizens can use it, can improve their quality of experience, and they can enjoy the e-governance services, which otherwise, was very, very difficult for them to access those government services in the pre sort of digitization era. So I think that is what the goal of any e-governance project should be. Technology is just a tool, to make that application.
Right. Very interesting perspective. I guess, of course, more than the government world, the corporate world suffers from the jargonization, right? So you can have better valuations for companies if you include terms like machine learning and AI and blockchain. So, but I think, yeah, fair enough. I think that probably applies to the government world also, or the governance world also. So, Professor, one follow-up question. You mentioned about like how like a grievance portal can be used by multiple departments, or it could even be commercialized, right? So it could even be useful for the outside world. Why just the government? So, like, would such projects give you the leeway to reach out to other stakeholders to quote unquote market these projects, or is it more pull based that you only respond to those who ask a question?
Well, so far I think our approach has been that, whenever the IIT Kanpur has been approached by the state or central governments or the ministries to help them address their immediate problems, we have addressed that. But IIT Kanpur has a very strong ecosystem of innovations and incubation, where constantly our effort is that the technology or the research that has been done in various labs and at various departments in the institute, we can actually commercialize them for the larger benefits. And there are many examples of that. And the same holds true even for the e-governance project. If we see that there is there is some unique technology that has been developed, and that has a larger business objectives, and that has a larger commercial gains, then we can obviously incubate that in our incubator, and that can be commercialized. And there are examples of that, not just in the e-governance I'm talking, but in the other technology things. Sometimes, however, that may have a limited objective, because some of the things, maybe a nationally strategic project, and therefore, only applicable for the defense or nationally strategic reasons. Then in that case, obviously, we would not like to commercialize it. But if the underlying research and the underlying technology has applications in other areas, and if that can be commercialized, then of course we do undertake that as a part of our incubation systems, or we can even license the technology to other industries. I mean, there are other companies or other industries which can take these technology and commercialize it and apply it in other domains. So that I think we constantly keep doing it. And even in such projects, if we see such an opportunity, if other industries are interested in taking it forward and commercialize and apply it in other domains, we will be really happy to do that.
Right. Interesting. So Krishna, before we end the conversation, one crystal ball gazing question for you. So you spoke briefly about cryptocurrencies. What's that all about? I mean, is it growing? Is it going to be scuttled by the central banks? What's your view on the or is it a currency at all? I mean, should we call it a store or value, or is it just an asset class? I mean, how do you see that space?
Again, it absolutely returns to the baseline philosophical stuff, right? So it's a hard question, right? I think people in power, the regulators, hate it almost viscerally, right? So almost without understanding and realizing why. There is fear, there is disdain for a private cryptocurrency, right? I think if it is the way humans are organized, right? We finally have decided that a centralized or governance in some fashion has worked well for humans for thousands of years, right? Now to abandon that and seek something else will need a really big jolt. So before that, what are people saying? People are saying that most regulators thought this is a fad, this will go away, right? So people have been waiting for it to die and collapse under its own weight for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. It's now about a decade where this obstinate thing refuses to die, right? So people are saying maybe it will sort of, it's the nuclear cockroach, right? So we built an internet where we said that I want a fault tolerant system, that even if enemies take out some of those intermediate points, the messages still should need to go through. That is something similar happening on the software side with this beast. Somebody in their homes has spun up currencies. You and I can decide to spin up a Bharat Varta coin, right? Now, so long as there is adoption to it and it's an open source stuff. So long as there is adoption and so long as it's unhackable, people are not being able to break it down. So where does that lead it? It's the same as any other technology, right? So every technology has benefits that it brings. being a digital native unit of accounting, if you may call it. So the internet, I mean, where is money? It goes back to what money is. Money really is the second half of every transaction, right? You have a goods and service, some exchange, and something in the other side has to be exchanged. So while a lot of human life has been moved to the online world, the money which we use today is still a beast from the past. If you know that the cross-border payments typically take 14 days to 2 months or 3 months, and it's enormously expensive. Remittances cost on an average 7 to 8%, right? When you finally realize with the UPI rails, we realize what is money. Money is nothing but an email. All I need is the amount in the address field, right? From to and the amount, and you are done. So in this day and age, for the physical money to cost so much is a pain. A digitally native currency ought to be able to do this instantaneous final settlement in a matter of milliseconds. Anything else is inefficient. So there are benefits to that, right? There is benefit to having an anonymous currency or a pseudonymous currency, which can be, I can do a transaction or a trade with somebody in New York or Munich, sitting over here. Maybe I'm purchasing a piece of music, or maybe I'm purchasing something that somebody has written, or maybe I want to tip someone in Jakarta for some nice one. Now all of those can potentially be possible with the digital native currencies. The flip side of that is obviously all the challenges that any technology will have, right? Nuclear energy has a bunch of benefits, and has a very long, as some very heavy downside to it. Similarly, we have all the KYC and the terrorist funding, all of those very serious challenges. So is there an intermediate medium through which you can examine this? Is there a prism through which cryptocurrencies can be examined? Is it a currency? Is it a commodity? Is it a store of value? Is it an accounting system? Is it just maybe it is just Facebook giving Facebook points to all its loyal users? Whatever it is, if it starts to gain acceptance, then you have the challenge, right? And because the nature of our governance, the centralized governance, and multiple countries that we have arrived at a situation which says that it works well if the state has the monopoly on money and muscle, right? If the states are very loath to have private armies inside their territories, right? So if all the security wallas outside our ATM shops or outside our buildings, they also need to be governed by the local police. So the state wants to retain the monopoly on muscle. Similarly, the state also wants to retain a monopoly on the money, right? So the money supply, because it is so deep, because it affects every single human transaction, right? I mean, apart from what happens within our family in terms of love and things that we do for one another inside a very small group of people, every other transaction that humans carry out has an accounting attached to it, has a settlement potential attached to it, or has an IOU attached to it, right? I did you a favor, therefore you owe me one, which may be redeemed in whatever shape or form. Now, states do not want to lose monopoly over that. I mean, which is completely understandable, right? So if there are private currencies which emanate everywhere, if the Facebook, I don't know what's the Libra Day is there. Now, those are the sort of things which have spurred the governments into action, right? So while blockchain may not be an appropriate solution for some particular thing, technology is also something that countries need to keep abreast of. If you decide that nuclear is bad and ban them forever, you may lock yourself down, but that does not stop the nuclear technology advancement to happen all around you in the rest of the world. So you have to be cognizant of that. So technology, like any other, has a good side and a bad side. You need to continue to experiment. You need to, because if you leave it out for too long, if you ban it for 10 years and then decide that you will catch up, I think blockchain technology in say places like China are potentially 5, 7, 8 years ahead of what Indian capabilities are. The sort of patents which come out of China, the sort of advancements that they've been doing, the sort of decentralized finance advancements in the West, are seriously too far ahead. And if India were not in a position to were to ban this, our ability to catch up, should we realize tomorrow that it is useful and necessary, will be severely impaired. Which is why we are doing, this national blockchain mission. Part of the reasons why we do that is it's almost an option. You're purchasing an option that if tomorrow this gets big, how do you handle this?
Yeah.
So cryptocurrencies is something similar. So therefore, most of the governments are now veering around to the view that fine, if this is going to be around, why don't we ourselves attempt this? Which is why all this host of CBDC initiatives, right? At last count, some 250 countries in the world are toying with CBDC, either wholesale or retail. Or so essentially, you are saying, fine, if there are benefits to it, let me provide the benefits. Let me see how can I tamp down the negative sides to it. If it is to be, if it's anonymization, maybe I will prohibit anonymization. So you take a more granular view rather than taking a hammer view and outright banning or proscribing something. So I think this is a more nuanced stuff. The paradox right now is phenomenal. The income tax department loves the currency because a lot of people make profits and pay taxes, treating it as a commodity. The Reserve Bank hates. The Ministry of Finance is worried about the potential misuse of all of this. Each view of the elephant is accurate, right? However, so it needs any technology which will have, GPT-4, right? GPT-4 is the new AI system which is out there. They said, I will not release it in public because it's a weapon of mass destruction, right? So you need to continue the research, but you also need to ensure that there are guardrails around it. I would imagine that all countries, and India included, will potentially begin to develop guardrails, have confidence in those guardrails, and around that permit e-currencies of some sort. The private cryptocurrencies and what they can do and what they represent will continue to be a challenge, will need to be monitored, and the governmental suspicions would continue. And I would imagine that it is quite appropriate to have that nature of suspicion, while not missing out on benefits of technological progress.
Right. That's a great perspective, Krishna. And in fact, we are trying to do some more conversations on this topic. So, on Bharat Varta, we can catch up on at some other time also on how this, the whole field is going to evolve. Professor Karandikar, one last question for you, and that's related on the research and development side. From the Western countries, we hear a lot of stories around academia involved in key R&D, and maybe it's just more noise. Maybe it's happening in India too, and we don't hear about it. But how do you see that role in India evolving? Are we doing? Are the institutions doing more in terms of R&D work, and is it that just that we don't know about it?
Yeah, no, I think what I would say is that today in governance in general, particularly in the increasingly digital world, there has been a lot of technology interventions now, that is coming into the governance. And therefore, the academic and research institutions which are involved in state-of-the-art technology development have a lot of role to play. And as you rightly said, that in the Western countries, there has been a lot of close collaborations between academia, industry, government. Okay, that has been in general lacking in India. But in the last 10 years or so, I would say that increasingly now there is a very closer interactions between the academia, industry, and also the government. And a lot of activities are happening. For example, a lot of incubation and innovation activities are happening. A lot of IITs, NITs, other universities have technology business incubator as a part of this. Many startups are coming out of the colleges and the universities who are having interactions with the industry. Technology is getting licensed to the industry. Indian industry is also is also doing a lot of in-house R&D, is developing products. It is not just importing the products or importing the technology. In the last 10 years, we have now seen increasingly Indian industry having their own R&D cell. And when the industry has their corporate R&D inside them, then obviously the interactions with the academia will increase. I mean, if you have a service industry, or if you have an industry which is mostly importing the technology and not developing anything indigenously, then obviously you will have less interactions with the academia. But that has changed in the last 10 years. And government also, I would say, is very keen to adopt the technology. The government is also very keen. And reason for this has been that, India is a country of 135 billion population, and such a scale really doesn't exist anywhere in the world. And to govern such a large population in an effective manner, you really need to deploy the technology-based solutions. Otherwise, it is not possible to provide, the governance or the services, citizen services which the government wants to provide, without technology interventions. So now that is possible. The government can also scale its services, and increasingly the government offices and the state and central government's ministries are also using very state-of-the-art technology. And when the government starts making state-of-the-art technology, obviously the interactions with the academia will improve, it will increase. The government, I will tell you the simple thing which IITs have been involved with. Even if we don't develop the technology, even if we don't develop the solutions like the project that we talked about, academia can play a role in advising the government that what is the state of the art, what are the technology options are available, what you can take it from the industry, right? I mean, it's not necessary that everything, the academia has to develop and give it to the government. The government can obviously can take it from the industry, but often a neutral technology viewpoint can come from the academia to advise the government. Because obviously, the industry or the vendors for their own commercial interest would go and pitch to the government in a commercial way. And I would say that profit neutral advice can come from the academia, that what is the possibilities with the technologies, what are the various solutions are available, so that the governments can make an informed decision about what technology to deploy and what commercial products to use. So this is the role that I think the academia can play. And I would say that in the last 10 years, the beginning has been made, and I see a much greater possibility in the next decade of a very closer industry, academia, and government relationships, because that is how we can contribute to the progress of the nation. And I think that has been there in most of the Western countries. Each has a role to play. Industry has a specific role to play. Academia has a specific role to play. The government has a specific role to play. And I would say that all the three need to come together in order to contribute to the larger goal.
Right. That's really insightful, Professor Karandikar. I think this was a wonderful discussion. I mean, the focus was blockchain, but we spoke a lot around it as well, around the concepts and philosophies of how this technology is evolving and governance in general. And
of course, I'm no expert in blockchain, but since I have been involved closely with the governments on many large, nationally important projects. I thought I could bring that perspective, but the blockchain per se, I'm no expert in that area.
No, I think fascinating insights, Professor. And I think we'll come back to you on the 5G question very soon. That would be really great to understand from you on the potential of that technology for the country. But thank you so much for taking out time, Professor Karandikar and Krishna, for this chat. And catch up soon on some other conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Nice job. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Bharat Varta podcast. If you want to see more content like this, then don't forget to subscribe to our channel. We started Bharat Varta to facilitate long-form discussions on politics, policy, and culture. We don't necessarily endorse anything that was said in this episode. If you wish to offer us feedback, do reach out to us on social media. We are at Bharat Varta on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You could also get in touch with us on our website, www.bharatvarta.in. The links are in the description below. Until next time, stay safe, take care, and Jai Hind.